Hey, Karen.
Muted. Hey, Vim, how's it going?
All good.
Glad to
I
hear
had
it.
some time today. I said, let's try to join.
What time zone are you in?
Europe this week. Yeah, I was in the US last week. Yeah.
Not too bad. This is a bit of a bad time, I think, for the US participants. So
West Coast is not so ideal, I think. 7.
Yeah.
It's okay, but it's if you have kids, it's always a problem, I think.
Yeah. My kids are old enough anyway; they can look after themselves. But
yeah, depends. Yeah, indeed, it depends on.
You're going to ONES anyway. You're doing a few presentations there, are you?
Yes, I have 2 talks, I think, at the moment. Yeah. They are related to Nephew, but I didn't put Nephew in the thing. The one is about this Yang thing that we discussed, that I pinged you upon.
Mm-hmm.
So we are soon releasing it.
Very good.
So
Hey,
but
Verada,
it's a
how's
bit
it
more
going?
work than expected.
Right.
As always.
It always is. It always is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello, Kieran.
Hey, man.
Hello.
Threw together an agenda for this meeting. Just throw it up while we're waiting for people to see if anybody else will join. See if we can find it. Go for that one. Close down all these tabs. Set my Teams to do not disturb. Trouble with using Zoom externally and Teams internally is that
Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah. Okey-doke. And share, where's my share button gone? I guess this is already being recorded, is it? It gave me
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I when I joined, it said that it was recording, so you can see that. Please allow the host.
Yeah, it says it up in the top left that it's recording. So
yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, I'll just share this document then and see how we get on with that. That means I lose visibility of who's actually in the call. Let's see if I pop that window open. That over there.
I can help if people raise their hands. Let me try.
Cool. Okay, there's only 4 of us, but we'll see how we get on and see who else joins over time. I know there's a bunch of my team are in an internal meeting, but I don't know about anybody else. I wanted to go through 3 items today. First one is I made a stab at starting to move some of Tal's original document into somewhat of a representation that we could use in the API repository in GitHub as a first step to sort of starting to move that into some kind of more formal documentation. I want to get some feedback on whether that's a good approach to continue with. Then I wrote this ticket on generating documentation. Of course, there's already some APIs that are being documented, so maybe we can compare and contrast with what needs to be improved upon over that. Those are the 3 items. And then the last one, this meeting time clashes with an internal meeting I have, so I was hoping we could take some discussion on whether or not we could move this to another slot, and if so, what slot that would be. But if we only get a few people here, I might send that out as another poll to the channel on Slack to see if there's a broader consensus. Is there anything else anybody wants to discuss, or is that an okay agenda to go with?
Okay for me. Yeah.
Okay, doke. All right. It's a pity Tal isn't able to join, but I'll have a chat with him as well offline. Am I sharing a screen or just a tab? Can you see the new? You can see the new tab.
Share a screen. Nephew API here.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. So I'll scroll down. What I've done is just a little bit of work based on this original document that Tal wrote. So you've all seen this document before, and it kind of goes into some level of detail with some color coding around the KRM types, are the entities that exist in the models as they are today, what they look like in terms of, you know, some kind of definition at a high level, and then you know, requirements, workloads, etc., and infrastructure. And what I wanted to do was to try and A, validate that in my own head as to where these things lived, and then B, try and maybe represent it in the actual repo where they live, so that instead of being in a separate document, we could actually maintain it and evolve it as part of this Git repo. So first of all, I'll walk you through briefly what I did at a high level. So all I really did was create, these are SVG images. The color coding, I arbitrarily chose it, but the intention was to group around, maybe around the KRM groups that we have. And I think loosely, if you look at actually, if I open up the repository as well, that would be a good place to start. A separate tab. We could be, it's NF requiremements, for example, NF topology and workload. So what I did was I took topology, looked at the types that are defined in here, compared and contrasted to what, sorry, wrong one, to what Tal had documented for topology here, or not here, sorry, that's workload here, further up. And then try to dig into this a little bit more detail. So maybe I'll use that diagram as something to walk through first, and then we can discuss A, am I close to the mark, and then B, is this worth continuing? So one of the things I also tried to do was, these are, I just used draw.io because it seemed like the easiest tool at the time, and I've saved them as SVG images. I linked from, in the SVG image, I linked from the text on each of the block boxes. So when I open it up in draw.io, you can actually click on the link. And when you open up the raw images in, see now, open image in new tab, hopefully that will work. You can actually see that the individual links here are called out as hyperlinks. And what that hyperlink there, for example, will do is bring you to the definition of the, right now I'm jumping into the code, so it takes you to the NF topology struct that's defined in the repository. Unfortunately, it seems when you render it in GitHub Markdown documentation, the links are deactivated for whatever reason, so it doesn't show up here. So what I wanted to do is maybe find out with our new documentation framework whether or not those links will be activated whenever it's shown up in that framework. And if it is, then so much the better. If it isn't, then I'll have to think of some other way of representing that. What I didn't want to do is to start calling out, for example, the different sort of entities and parameters that are available in each in each entity type, but rather to allow you to go directly to the source for that. And I guess over time we should link to generated documentation from these rather than to directly into the source code. But for now, I thought at least linking to where the source code is allows you to drill into that object. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, this is definitely a good. Yeah, I raised my hand a bit, but you don't see it probably, right? See, what I was always when I saw that what did, right? The problem is we have to maintain it.
Yes.
Right, which is the hard part. Doing it the first time and doing it if you haven't looked at it before is nice because you educate yourself and stuff like that. But you probably don't want to do it a second time. So I was thinking about, can we not, because if you look to the document, the code, right? We have these cube builder tags, right?
Yep.
Can we not try to do something along those lines that we use some tags to basically generate, because what we have in the API, I think, and you touch upon your third bullet, I think I saw in the agenda, is that, okay, so this API is uploaded to a system and then it generates the API REST calls, right, from it. So
yeah.
So that's a tool that the Kubernetes community, I think, built, right? So, but what you don't have, and then you have more of a, let's say, a web-friendly view on it, but yeah, it's still very much it's basically generated from the code, right?
Yes,
the thing that
and ideally that link would link to this link rather than to the documentation, rather than to the code directly. Yes, is that
correct? So I think that's what we should do. I think, from my perspective, because every time we release, right, we will update this file, because this is basically 2 minutes of work, even less, right? So you just upload your files and the thing generates it for you. So there's zero effort involved. There's 1% effort involved if you so that's the nice thing. But what we do not have is the relationships that you're drawing, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't want to put the effort into trying to manually document the parameters and everything else in these. What I would like to do in the medium term is to link from here, NF topology object there should link directly to this.
Yeah. I also think if I look to your drawing, I mean, I don't know whether anyone has an opinion, but the difference between spec and status, I would not call out personally.
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, I'm a newbie here in terms of the.
Yeah, sure. I mean, but that's my personal view. But I don't know how others feel. But
I'll give you a reason why I did. It was because for example, here, data network spec and data network status, there were multiple sort of things. So there's a data network status and then pool status underneath that, and that's where, and the pools are over here. So I guess if you're looking for pool status, this seems to be where you go. Now I'm not.
Yes,
that's correct.
So typically when we model a resource, right? So typically, you provide a status for the objects that you're managing inside of the spec, right?
Oh, with that, I would have expected that to be over here for some reason.
Yeah, but in Kubernetes, you have Kubernetes has a spec, right? And then you have a sub resource, which is status, basically. So that's how they model it. So everything that goes on status goes under status / and then you have the freedom basically to do it. But the sub resource of status is part of the API ecosystem from Kubernetes. Actually, I think there is 2 sub resources. I think so scale and status are 2 sub resources that you get that you can apply to your API. It's not mandatory.
Okay.
But all the status fields are going under that let's say subdirectory, if you will, or sub API, because typically it's modeled as /status under. So you have your root object on which spec is, and then you have /status, and then under there you see all the statuses. If you looked from a REST point of view.
Yeah, exactly. But in this context here, you can check the NF topology status from the NF topology object. Is that right? Or
so if you look to the object, if you do a query or a get on NF topology, right, you get normally you get both. But you could only do a get on status, for example, but the spec you get always from the main object. That's how the API system works in Kubernetes right now. So that's yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would, yeah, but I think it's also for others to give an opinion about that, right?
I think for somebody new, I think there are pros and cons to both, because for somebody new going in, they would have to drill through the kind of topology object into the status object, into the spec object, and then through the spec object into the actual definitions. Whether or not that makes a difference, and when we link to this documentation, then I guess it's not so much of an issue, because it's no longer present there. So you just have direct.
There they are present, right? You see.
Oh, it is present. You see. Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
I think at the first glance, it is even valuable to have a diagram where we totally ignore the status part. So we only focus on the spec and do not care about the status of any of the resources. And then separately, we may have a more detailed version. But when I'm thinking of modeling the whole topology, networks, instances, the spec is what is really important for me. Status is more like a runtime. It becomes important during runtime.
But we do model ways in which we report. That's what I was trying to get at, because I see your point, but my counter argument was that in the case of this data network status, we report pool status underneath it, as opposed to reporting it over here under pool.
Yeah.
So we make modeling decisions around where we report the status of different objects.
Yes. Yeah. So I understand.
So that's due to Kubernetes, I think, Kieran, right? So it's not we make this. I think Kubernetes. The Kubernetes API forces you to do so.
Well, it was written in our code, so I guess that was my understanding. Like, for example, under the status here, you have pools, and you have IP claims, whereas under network instance, for example, actually maybe
we don't have any.
Maybe
no, there is no status. Normally, the spec is only what your desired status, right? So I desired status, then a wrong word, or is a strange word. So that's your desired config, if you will, or desired spec. And status, depending on your logic, you then report upon those, but you have the freedom to do whatever you want, basically. But you can also not report anything.
So what I was trying to say is that most probably we will do the modeling in two stages. In first stage, we will only think about, we need networks, I don't know, routing tables, network function instances, things like that. So we only think about all of these, and the network function instance model has to have these information in it. And that is only focusing on the spec. And in the second stage, when we only know what kind of resources we will need in general, then we can think about how and where to put the status parts, how to model the status parts. I'm not saying that we will not think about that. I'm saying that in a first stage, I would ignore them. That's it.
Okay, but I guess then the question would be, are we going to create two lots of diagrams and document them twice, or are we going to try and...
Yeah, and this comes back if we can automate it. So if we can automate it, and it is after the automation process, it has no cost to generate two kinds of diagrams, then it's okay.
And then I guess the question there is, are we capturing design? What I'm trying to do now is just document what we have. So I guess the first pass I'm trying to do here is I'm not trying to boil the ocean. What I'm trying to do is really just take what Tal had done and iteratively improve on that by moving it into the Git repository and making it a little bit closer to the actual implementation that we have. And then what I think we can do is we can improve on how we capture that information and iterate on that going forward. Yeah. So I think we do need to look at automating it, but I don't want to necessarily hinder the creation of, if you think that what I'm creating now is heading in the right direction, then I think there's benefit to maybe persisting that somewhat in the Git repo. Maybe we put some caveats up here in terms of the accuracy of the information and so on. But otherwise to try and capture it here and then do some investigation into tooling about generation and so on. And then I can take the point about whether or not I include the spec and the status or not in this first pass. We can take those out at this point if it makes people feel like it's easier to read. I don't mind.
See, it's for me, the effort you're doing is viable, I think, Kieran, because of the fact that without this effort, you don't know what your automation thing needs to do, you see?
Exactly,
right?
yes.
So in other words, I always, when I try to automate you first, some people can do it purely theoretical, but I typically want to see something and then I understand what you have to do. So from that point of view, it's very viable.
Okay.
And then we can see what to do, right? For it, but in normally what I tend to see, and maybe it's not complete, is the relationship between the object itself, right? Like sometimes a reference, right? And then and to which object. Now in some cases it's flexible, right? So some of them so in this mode it's not so flexible, but so there are other cases where it's potentially flexible, right? So we have like this config ref that we have, which is completely opaque, right? It can reference anything.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes I've done this kind of reference by name, where it's basically your template talks about an NF class, but it just refers to the string, and then you use the string, I guess, to find the class.
Yeah, it's GVK typically, so it's group version kind, namespace name is typically the thing, right? But namespace we try to ignore, because then you have the issue of cross namespace stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it's typically group version kind, namespace name, unless you know the explicit object. So in here it's NF class, so it's defined, right? But so there is other reference where the group version kind is not defined.
How do I hide this little thing up here? That's better. Yeah, so maybe like an NF template is that example. So an NF template has an NF type, has an NF interface, an NF class. So the NF interface is an array of interface objects or interface structs, I guess. And then it has a class, which is a string. And this is where you're saying this is the...
in this case, it's fixed, right? So in this case, it's NF class, so the group version kind is known, right? And you only have the name. But there are other cases where the GVK is how I call it, is unknown.
Yeah,
it can reference to almost anything.
Exactly. I would say this is kind of a this is what I'm calling a reference by name, and then this is a kind of a this is an encapsulation relationship. So the NF template contains these NF interfaces. I don't know if that's it's a containment relationship, sorry. So you kind of got the 1-to-n relationship there as a kind of containment, similar to what Tal was representing in his diagrams. Only he kind of had multiple instances of them to represent cardinalities. I'm just using the kind of the 1-to-n.
No, that's good. Yeah, and yeah.
Capacity there is a reference to a capacity object or a capacity struct, because
that should also be by name, not?
It's by this capacity spec.
Mm-hmm. Because it's
I don't know if that's a containment hierarchy or whether that refers to something is created that exists elsewhere. And multiple NF templates can refer to it.
Let me have a look in the code. It seems to be a bug. Because you should never refer to the spec. You should always refer to But I know what this is. Yeah. So this is actually within the object, but it uses the spec of capacity. Okay, I know what this is. So what we did is we have a capacity claim, right, or a requirement, we call it, right, a requirement, and then it refers to the structure of that object. So it's not a reference to anything. It's actually the data is in this resource.
So it should be a containment.
Yes.
Okay, I'll
It's
change that.
similar to NF interface.
Yeah, I'm reading it now. I don't know why I put it as a ref. I think I might have put it as a ref because maybe Tal had put it as a ref. I don't know.
Yeah, this is so this is basically we copy. So the structure of the data that sits underneath is the same as the capacity CRD.
Okay.
And so we just refer to the same, but it's part of this object, so it's not even a reference. Yeah.
Should be containment, not reference.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we want to? Okay, so what I'm hearing is continue with this and try and get some kind of consensus, and maybe I can send out some kind of a pull request once I've fleshed this out in a bit more detail. I'll pick some colors for the different what do you call them? The groupings, and put a little bit more text around it, create a pull request, and maybe that can be the way we continue to do the review. Do we want to continue to read through this now, or is it okay?
Oh, it's okay. We can do it off. Yeah, for me, it's okay.
Okay. So continue consensus.
What we should try to do, Kieran, I think, is to see which are the references we need, right? So like you have the containment, probably we don't need the reference for because it's contained in the code, right? Because if you go to your API, the GitHub, if you go to NF deployment, right, or the one that you were showing, right? If you go to the previous one, not here, the one that with which we generate.
Oh yeah, sorry.
NF, yeah, the one.
It's over here. Sorry, yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, this one. So if you would go to NF deployment, right? Oh. Yeah, click on it, I think, or refresh. It's slow.
Yeah, I think it generates it on the fly each time. So there we go.
Really?
So yeah, it's talking
so if you go to NF,
stuff.
right? So where's? Let me have it. Yeah. So if you go to NF deployment, right? Yeah. If you click on that.
Yeah, I did, but it's just taking its time.
That's bad.
Yeah, I think these need to be statically generated. That was part of the other story that we need to talk about in a minute. And maybe improve the way that the documentation is generated here so that it's bundled statically rather than generated on the fly each time.
Yeah, so what I was just trying to refer to is look at this this data, and my expectation is that the capacity that you saw, all the data fields are actually seen in this in the API. So if you click on capacity, you see everything is here.
Yeah.
You see.
Yeah, but that's because it's basically a struct. But in the context of
yes,
like if you go back here, it's also represented here. So
yeah, correct. So the way this works, right? So and that's one of the so that's the challenges that we have with the document that Tal has I built, which was one of my comments, is like if you look to how specialization works, because that's how this is used, right? So capacity is actually a requirement. You see it as part of the requirement. So by itself, it will never be actuated on a cluster. So anything that you see as requirements, right, are actually never actuated on a cluster. They are there to help, assist in. So some people call this claims, right? So these are a claim on something, right? So now whether you put them into the cluster or not, so at the moment we are not putting them in the cluster because we're using them in packages at the moment. You could apply them to the cluster, right, as well. But so these are inputs to actually generate NF deployment. So in other words, what we did is for capacity, because it's a one-to-one relationship, capacity is provided, and then we basically copy it into NF deployment. So that's why you see it's a containment. So we don't do much processing with capacity other than referencing it, other than copying the data actually and putting it in NF deployment. But there are others where we do some more processing on. But that's why you see capacity here as a separate entity, but it's not applied to, you will never, it only lives in packages at the moment.
Yeah, but from a modeling perspective, it's an important aspect of what we model because
yes,
we don't. So that's why we call it out as a separate object, and it's something that we should probably call out. And even though it's as you say, it's contained within the
But so the way you this should be modeled is actually capacity as an input to NF, the NF template, right? Actually to NF deployment. It's not even to NF template in my view. Because NF template doesn't even exist, I think.
In the cluster or as a KRM or as a
unless it was built with topology or something like that, but we never used it.
Template is not KRM. It is a field of the NF instance, I think. So, yeah.
That's why I'm saying it's like it's not even an object, I think.
I could have sworn I saw it somewhere.
Yeah, it's probably a struct.
Yeah, no. Yeah, Kieran, it means that it is a struct. So there is a struct called NF template that we are using to be just a field of a specification, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like capacity.
Okay, so are you proposing that NF instance actually?
So NF, it's a containment. So NF template is a containment of NF instance.
Again, I can argue on both sides if we want to include NF template here or if and capacity or not. I'm not sure. Both I can argue on both sides actually.
Yeah, I mean Tal hadn't included it here, so.
Yeah, we should basically look at it from what our API does today, right? So we try to document what we do, right? So we should be consistent, I think, in my view, from in general, because then we should, right?
I mean, that was what I was trying to get at. Yes. So if we look at NF, sorry, what was it? NF instance. Is not there. No,
I don't think it's an object, it's a containment.
Okay, so yeah, maybe this is what rather than going directly and mapping what appears in the code as structs, then I need to come in here and model it through what appears here. Is that what I'm hearing?
We should provide consistency, right? Either we call out the containments explicitly, right? But then we should do it across the board, right? Or we embed them into the object itself. So either way, I'm fine with, but it should be consistent is my feedback, right? But I think I would, at the moment, focus more on the structure we have in the APIs rather than, and we can maybe call the containments out or something. But is it not better? Because yeah, I mean, okay, people should comment, I think.
Okay, I'll go back and have a rethink. I think I've taken some input on board on that, and I'll try and draw some new alternatives, and we can bring it back next week and have another discussion.
Sure.
I can make it.
I think what we can put into the minutes is to consider creating a diagram where we only have the KRMs. Like one rectangle is just a KRM, And that includes the spec, the status, all the included fields and everything, and depict the relationships between the KRMs, because that is the first design that we want to have, and then go in more and more details from them.
Okay.
Is it understandable? So yeah, so there are a lot of structs on these diagrams, and yeah, and in this first stage that I try to talk about, it is more about just the whole KRMs. So Kubernetes resources with specs, status, metadata, everything else, GVK, things like that.
Okay. I'll make a stab at that and bring it back again. I'll either put it in, if I get a chance between, well, hopefully I will get it done between now and the end of the week. I'll stick it in the Slack channel, and maybe I'll just keep it on my own sort of fork for now, but I can create a pull request at some point after we've had another sort of maybe meeting like this to discuss. Is that okay? Good. I'm not hearing any conflict on that. In terms of the, I mean, I'm just using SVG images, and if anybody has any better ideas, I've messed around with Mermaid, which is kind of inline documentation, but I didn't really like the way that looked. So
I just found something that was interesting at first. I think it was called D2. It is like Mermaid. Okay, I will send the link. I haven't used it ever, so but at first glance it seems promising. So I will send the link to a tool, diagramming tool. It is also a text-based diagramming tool as well.
Yeah. I kind of quite like text-based ones, and I use like PlantUML a lot internally, but the logistics of the tool chain to generate the images and store them then might be overhead in terms of editing them. So I just thought draw.io would be the easiest for people to work with. But if you have something better that can work natively with GitHub or...
Okay, to be honest, I don't have anything against draw.io. I'm using it as well, so it's okay. I just thought that if we want to work with a text-based tool, I understand that SVGs are XMLs, but you would never manually edit the XML of an SVG. Yep. So these text-based tools like PlantUML that you mentioned, they are very Git compatible. So,
yes, exactly. Yeah. Okay. If you could send on the D2 thing, rings a bell, but I don't remember having played with it at least recently. So.
Okay, we'll do sampling. I mean, right now I'm driving, but I will send the link. I don't know, today.
Okay,
later.
Please do not try and send links while you're driving. It's probably bad for your health. Okay, on to the second point then, which was this issue, which a couple of weeks ago, we reviewed a user story which I'd started creating. And I think there was a sense in that meeting that it was not worthwhile to go the whole way to creating a user story. We could just bring documentation generated from the models through SIG automation directly as a kind of as a GitHub issue. So I created this, but I guess in parallel, the guys in the documentation task force, I think it's called, obviously integrated this aspect, which I think I refer to here. So you can, I think that's using this tool here. So this docs.crds.dev tool. And this is, I guess, then why it kind of, because you basically paste the URL to your Git repository in here and you hit go, and it generates the documentation on the fly each time. Now the tool itself, I think, is downloadable. And what we should potentially be able to do is to integrated in as a tool chain into the documentation that we generate, so that instead of appearing like this as a kind of an embedded reference that's dynamically generated all the time, it would appear as a kind of a core part of the API documentation. So that was my proposal here, was we make the CRD documentation accessible via the Nefio docs page. So that is done, but as we say, it's dynamically generated. We should take that tool and use in our build process to generate documentation as part of the docs site. Then we need to say, are there any other CRDs or models of any other kind that are hosted in other repos? Thinking about Porch, for example, I think they might be separate. There are ones that are related to the Free 5G core and OpenAir interface, and they're part of the Nefio project. Porch is referred to here. That probably should be referred to under that. Is there any other documentation that we should include here? Do we need to are these mutators part of our API, part of our overall exposure or integration points? Right now, so when you go in here, you don't actually see a lot of information. So each one of these then needs to be updated with details about the the various objects that are available. Maybe what is each object, and so on and so forth. And then the overarching documentation describing the holistic view with the interactions and dependencies. This is kind of what I've started. Specify some documentation at group and version level. So that's kind of yeah, I think that's kind of getting into the different groupings within the so the interactions between the different groups within the overall documentation. So workload and requirements and so on and so forth. That should be indented a bit more.
Yeah, we built quite some user guides for the SDK, for example, for the functions. That should also be referenced from the docs, probably.
Yeah, I think that's referenced from the docs. I think this is more focused on the modeling and the API specification, as opposed to the user guides are more related to the specific use cases. Now, there is much more there, actually. Now, I noticed the other day. Docs.nefio.org. So are you in guides, for example, user guides? So you're talking these guides, is it?
No, the SDK, which we did, so it's not there, I think.
Okay. Do you have a reference to that?
Yeah, it's in our Git, in the Nefio Git repo. I'll send you a link. So under Nefio itself? No, it's under Nefio. Nefio, if you go to KRM functions, and then you go to, I think it's lib. Is it correct? Maybe. Yeah, and then the SDK. Yeah. So there's a README normally here. No?
No README, no.
Or design.md it is. Describes completely how it works. With code and stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah,
there's more documents there, by the way. We wrote, for example, for every controller, we have this doc.
Okay, let's
So if you go to the controller, at least I did a doc for every controller to explain what it's supposed to do without you having to write to the look at the code. That was the idea.
Cool.
There's
Okay,
more to go down to the controllers, right? I think I wrote, or at least for my controllers, I wrote a doc for every. If you go to controllers, you see per controller a design doc. Go to reconcilers. Take yeah, Bootstrap or something. See, you have a README, which explains how it works. It's a summary, basically.
Mhm.
But I wrote it for every controller. I think I'm not sure whether everybody did that, but this is also good info to share to the docs, I think, to the community, right?
Yep, makes sense.
Rather than having for people to look at the detailed code, basically. And for example, if you do nullify, you can actually auto-generate, auto-link this document, for example. So it would be very easy to do from the docs point of view to reference these, right?
Mhm.
Because they might evolve, right? So they might change.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, the docs might change, or the
No, for example, if we do a change in the code, right? I always, when I do the review of the PRs, I always try to make sure that our docs or the design, the doc stay up to date, right?
Mhm.
As such, if we then do changes to release 2 or release 3 or whatever, right? In these controllers, then the docs that we have in the Git repos are reflecting for people who are not into code, what those things are supposed to do, right?
Mhm.
Right.
Okay.
Like
So
Fiacra used this initially to look at the code, for example. So he used this as a beginning, and then he was digging into the code, right?
okay. Good. I can collate a list of those documents that should be pulled together as well. So
Yeah, it's probably not related to modeling per se. But...
no, it's kind of getting beyond the scope early, but
yeah, I agree.
I don't think it's it kind of ties into this user story more than anything, but I can certainly create and collate it as part of this. So to update this user story. And maybe then bring it into the documentation task force to take it further.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that last one, I think we've just done that. Okay, I think that was a good discussion. I think I have homework to do to take this on a bit further and to simplify the diagrams a bit more and make them a bit more reflective of what the users will interact with as opposed to what's in the underlying code structures. And to start with that kind of a stage 1 view. I propose that for meeting times, I'm going to send this out on because there's only 3 of us now, and maybe that's not enough of a quorum. Maybe I'll send that out on the broader mailing list as a
yeah, we have only a few people here, right? So it's probably good. But it shows that maybe the time it's my first time that I attend, so I don't know how the attendance is in general, but
I've cancelled it twice and I've run it 3 times, so it's kind of I haven't been consistent enough myself probably in running it.
Yeah, okay, that doesn't. Yeah, if the leader has a problem, it's not a good thing. You better think it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one reason why I want to change it, but also I think it's a challenge for North America, but then it's also a challenge on the other side for India. So I think it's a kind of a question of maybe saying, do we go earlier than this slot? Do we go later than this slot? Do we run it on a different day at the same time?
Yeah.
Nothing really is perfect by any stretch. I don't mind doing late evenings, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, sure.
I'll put out a few proposals and see what sort of feedback we get. And maybe if I also provide a link to this documentation as part of that, there might be some people might show an interest because they see something being done.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything last points anybody wants to raise on this, or are we okay to drop 10 minutes
that's
early?
good. Yeah.
Thanks very much for the input and the good discussion. We'll chat to you again soon.
Yeah.
Cheers.